everyone. This is Nurse Mo, and welcome back to the Straight A Nursing Podcast. As always, I am so happy that you are here, and I am super excited to be bringing you another bonus episode. So a few weeks back, we did a bonus episode about emergency room nursing with this awesome nurse, Michael Smith, from the Real Talk School of Nursing podcast. So if you are at all interested in learning what ER nursing is about and just getting a completely different perspective on nursing school, check out that bonus and then go and check out Michael's podcast. He is such a great guy. He's really funny. He's got a huge heart, and he's really passionate about mentoring and being there for students. So today's bonus is about CRNA nursing. So we have Jenny Fennell that I interviewed about a week ago or so, and Jenny is going to share with you all kinds of great information about CRNA school, how to get in, what it's like, what the job is like. It's really great if you're at all interested in exploring that as a career option. So without further ado, let's dive in to the interview. Why don't we start, Jenny? You give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So for everyone, my name is Jenny Fennell. I have been a CRNA for 6 years now, and I started my career at a level 1 as a CRNA. I started my career at a level 1 trauma hospital, did open heart, and kind of as I transitioned, we actually moved back home to be closer to family. And right around that time, I started mentoring some students, whether that be OR nurses or just different students who reached out to me on social media. And when I moved back home, I started a career at a surgery center where we did a lot of regional blocks, peripheral nerve blocks, and found myself not really being thrilled with the surgery center environment. So I now actually work at a level 1 trauma pediatric hospital, and they're also the major burn center in the city. So we get adults who have burns. So it's kind of a nice blend of both. And so that's kind of my career. That sums me up in a nutshell for 6 years, but I've loved every minute of it, and I would never change my career for the world. So I'm happy to share with you guys.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. I think one of the things that students maybe looking at the CRNA pathway might not realize is that it's not just OR environment. So I love that you mentioned some different types of environments. So we'll talk about that in a bit. But first, I want to let's get into the mindset of a student who is maybe thinking that they want to do something beyond or different than your traditional bedside nursing. So if I'm a student who's in nursing school, what kinds of things can I do right now if I'm just even considering thinking about CRNA as a pathway for me?
That is a great question. I'm very excited to go over this because this is where I think a lot of people potentially run into problems later on if they discover this career path later. And so I know for me, I was pretty fortunate that when I started my BSN career, and just the kind of backstory on that, I actually took 5 years to get my BSN because I was not accepted the first time I applied. And so when I finally got in, I had heard about CRNA, and just like I think the vast majority of nursing students, you hear, oh, it's a good career, you make a lot of money, you have autonomy, you have to be really, and then of course you hear the things like you have to be really smart, you have to be top of your class, that, you have to, it's very hard. And, I honestly didn't at the beginning of my nursing career path, even though I was kind of like, well, that sounds interesting, I wonder what that's all about. I didn't believe in myself that I even had the ability to do that, even if I wanted to. I definitely had, typical lack of confidence that, like I said, I was not accepted into the College of Nursing my first try. So in my head, I just thought, well, I'm not smart enough for that. So, but that being said, I went on my nursing career, did my clinicals, and I kind of kept the CRNA in the back of my mind, even though I never really actively pursued it. It wasn't until my senior year in nursing school when I did my ICU rotation also to kind of back up so I don't lose you, I was a nurse's tech. So I got into nursing school after probably, I think it was a requirement to be in the program for 9 months to a year. And then you qualified to get your CRNA, which is your nursing assistant license. I did that. I worked in a what was that, peripheral vascular disease floor. So it wasn't even an ICU, it was just peripheral vascular disease. Saw a lot of diabetic patients who, had gangrene limbs, that type of thing. But it was in the heart hospital. And I know the floor above me was open heart. I would occasionally float up there. And every time I would, I'd be terrified because there'd be someone coding, or I just thought there's no way I could ever do ICU nursing. It's too scary. And so that was where I was as a nursing student. And again, it wasn't until my critical care rotation as a senior nursing student that I was like, you know what? And I was in the SICU, and I got exposed to CRNAs at the time who would give me a report. And I kind of got more curious, started researching it more, and I fell in love with ICU nursing and the complexity of it. I love pathophysiology. I love pharmacology. And so I made a commitment to myself that I was going to actively pursue CRNA. I then transferred as a nurse's tech into the medical ICU and finished up my last year in nursing school as a tech in the medical ICU. And I loved it. It was challenging. It was scary. It was hard, but I knew I had a lot of learning to do. If I was going to become a CRNA, I had to really engulf myself in the ICU world and try to learn as much as I could. So that is kind of how I set myself up from the very beginning as a nursing student to kind of get my foot in the door and get into the ICU. And that's really key. I think people who wait on that step right there have trouble as a new grad getting in with no experience, getting right into the ICU. So sometimes they have to start in the step down or even med surge and then transfer to step down and then the ICU. But me getting in as a tech, I worked hard. I worked really hard. I made sure those nurses loved me. I helped out. I was a team player. I had a good attitude. And I got offered a spot in the residency program as a brand new grad and got right into the ICU. And that was a challenging step because being a fresh nurse, not only are you still a novice in everything you're doing, but now you're taking care of critically sick patients who are on their deathbed potentially, or knowing how to delegate as a new nurse is hard. Even for someone who's a seasoned, it can be hard to delegate. But now as a new nurse, you have to know how to delegate when you're in a critical situation. So it was a great experience. It was a big, steep learning curve. And I think that scares a lot of people too. But I think getting your foot in the door as a tech allows you to not be as scared for that step because you see it. And the nurses really they'll take you under their wing. You hear a lot of, nurses eat their young, and I just don't, and sure, there might be out there, but for the most part, if you have a good attitude going into it, and I found just the opposite, especially in the ICU. They really took me under their wing, really told me what I needed to do, and kind of worked with me because they knew they wanted me to be a nurse for them. So they made sure that I knew what I needed to do that. So that's a good place to start as a nursing student. Research it. There's lots of resources out there. I encourage you to shadow. That was one of the first steps I did back when I was a nursing student. When I was in the ICU as a nursing student, I was getting a report from a CRNA. And after the report, now granted, it wasn't a super critical patient. I wasn't, be mindful of that. You don't want to, in the middle of a critical report, you don't want to pull them aside and chit chat. But again, it was a stable patient. And I actually said, hey, would you mind if I asked you a little bit about being a CRNA? And they were happy to talk about it. And I said, I would love to shadow you sometime if we could exchange numbers. And the CRNA was happy to do so. They were within the month I was in the OR shadowing that person. And I loved every second of it. I remember just feeling overwhelmed, but excited and just kind of just fascinated with like, wow, I can't believe they can do all this. And they know how to draw up all these drugs, know exactly how much to give and what to give and when to give it. It kind of blew my mind that this was a nurse and this is what their role was. And they were at the head of the bed in charge, calling the shots, talking to the surgeon, talking to the anesthesiologist, and coming up with a game plan on how to get this patient through what could be a critical surgery safely. It just was so I knew at that moment that I had to make this work for me. And so shadowing, I think that's one of the first things you can do to kind of make sure you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket if you've never actually dipped your toes in the water. You want to really make sure that this is something that you feel that adrenaline, you feel that surge of excitement. You really want to feel passionate about what you pursue because yes, the road is hard, it's long, and it's expensive. So don't get into it and then realize you made a mistake. You want to make sure you're putting that investment up front to make sure it's what you really want. And really the next step, and this should occur in nursing school, is research your schools. They were all different. And that actually is where I see a lot of students struggle with the most, is the fact that these schools can all be a little different and look at their candidates in a slightly different way. You have to make sure that you meet all the requirements. Some nursing schools don't even require chemistry, which most nursing anesthesia programs do require chemistry, and not just chemistry, but chemistry plus a lab and maybe even organic chemistry. So again, knowing this early on can allow you to prepare for this. So maybe when you first graduate, you can take an organic chemistry class, or maybe they require a graduate statistics course. You can get that out of the way. I took a graduate level stats my senior year in nursing school because I knew my future CRNA program required it. I got permission as a senior nursing student to take graduate level stats. I did have to get permission to do that in my undergrad, but it is clearly doable. I did that, got it out of the way because, again, I was a 5-year nursing BSN student. I had the room in my schedule. I figured might as well get it done. It's either that or I work more hours, so I might as well take this class. And then when I graduated and worked in ICU, I focused on my GRE and my CCRN, as well as we got married. So I planned a wedding. So it wasn't all, work. I did have some fun. But the GRE I had to take twice, and that's a pretty awful test. I'm just going to be honest. That's an awful test. It was math that I hadn't even thought about since high school, and my high school career was not great. So it was challenging. I had to actually pay for a tutor, invested a lot of money in that test to do well. But that was my focus after school. So research your school, get to know the requirements, whether you meet the chemistry requirements, those types of things, whether you need grad stats or something like that. And also check into labs, make sure that if you have a chemistry, do they require chemistry with a lab? And again, just making sure all that'll make your life and your transition so much easier. And then the next thing too is go to open houses. All these programs have open houses, and that is not only a great way to network and find out more information, but they'll recognize your face. And if they can put a name with a face, when you go to that interview, they can say, I know you because I have seen you around for the last 3 years coming to our open house. I know you want this. I'm telling you guys, that's invaluable. And not to mention, it'll allow you to get your questions answered, network with current CRNAs in the program, make sure the program is actually a good fit for you. There's nothing better than to talk to current CRNA or CRNAs, which are student nurse anesthetists, to see if they're happy, because you don't want to go to a program and be blindsided by stuff that you weren't aware of. If you actually have connections with current CRNAs, you're going to know all this prior to going into the program. And just like every college, not all colleges are equal. So you're making a big investment in time and money. Make sure you're going to be happy. And then grades. That's really sums it up in nursing school. Grades are important, you guys, and not just overall grades. I'm talking about science GPA versus regular GPA, and you should know your science GPA. To figure out your science GPA, they look at things like chemistry, micro, or any kind of biology, math courses like algebra or stats. They look at chemistry and anatomy, physiology. So you want to take just those core science classes, and typically those are the classes you take prior to getting accepted into your nursing program. And if it's a 4.0 and it's 4 credits, that's 16 points. If it's a B, that's a 3.0. And if it's a 4 credit class, that's 12 points. And essentially you add up all your points and then divide it by your total credit hours. That'll give you your science GPA. You want to know that. The where I see people struggle the least is if they have at least a 3.4 science GPA. I know that may seem high, and it doesn't mean that you can't get accepted with a science GPA of a 3.0, but know that if you have a 2.8 or a 3.0 science GPA, especially, you're going to have to do some extra things like taking graduate level science courses to prove to these programs you can maintain a B average, because you have to get a 3.0 or maintain a B average to not be on academic probation or even kicked out of these programs. So they look for a track record that proves to them that you can handle that. So know that it's not off the table if that's the case. But again, people think just because they got a 4.0 in their BSN, but maybe their ADN is a 2.8, they're not sure why they didn't get an interview, but it's because your ADN is where all your core sciences actually are. And that's what they look at more closely than just your BSN coursework. So, and a lot of this can be figured out if you go to open houses and you talk to the program director and say, hey, can you do a transcript review for me? I would really appreciate it. Most schools are happy to do that for you. And And the ones who don't, you can always take it upon yourself again to calculate your grades yourself or ask around. I even tell students sometimes that if their program won't do a transcript review, to call it in their program and act like you're interested in that program and have them do it for you, which maybe I shouldn't advertise that secretly, but I mean, if you need help, you need help. And you got to be willing to find a way to get the help and know what you have to do to better yourself, to become a good candidate. So that sums it up. That's a lot, I know, but hopefully I answered some questions.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think it's definitely important that students, kind of think about what their options might be further down the road. And the sooner you can start planning for that, the better. Because from what I understand, you have to have critical care experience to even apply. Is that correct?
That is correct. And we can kind of go into that next with work experience. And that's also where I see a lot of people make some mistakes. One of the biggest mistakes I actually see is people think ER counts as ICU experience. And don't get me wrong, I know some ERs actually have like an ICU holding area where maybe if they can't get a bed right away, they actually get holded in this ICU waiting area. But for the most part, ER nurses don't long-term over a 12-hour shift manage a critically sick patient. They get them stable enough to transfer up to the unit. So they may be starting some drips, but they're not long-term managing those drips or the ventilator or anything like that. So a lot of schools, not very many of them, some of them will take ER wholeheartedly. Some will say on an individual basis. Well, what individual basis means is, what does the rest of your application look like, and how well can you do in your critical care interview that they're going to put you through? And so they may still accept you with ER experience, but you're not going to be putting yourself in the best spot possible to be competitive against someone who has, say, SICU or MICU experience. So I really encourage you guys, before you take a ER job, that you make sure that the program you're interested in actually full, hard, open hands takes ER experience. If you see individual basis, I would be leery. I would still encourage you to go to the actual true ICU to give yourself the best edge possible. The other units to be wary of are PACU, cath lab, OR. People sometimes think that these count. This does not typically count. But then you'll say, well, I know someone who had OR experience and they became a CRNA, or I know someone who's in the cath lab. Well, typically what happens is they have ICU experience, then they transfer to the cath lab, they interview, they get accepted. The other caveat to that is not all schools will take you if you are not currently working in the ICU, meaning I've had students who don't look into this, and they say they apply to school with after 2 years of ICU experience. In the meantime, in the 6-month waiting period, they transfer to the cath lab, they get an interview, they find out they're in the cath lab, they say, well, unless you can get back into the ICU, you forfeit your spot. Don't let that happen to you. Make sure you know your school's policy on whether you have to maintain a full-time work status in the ICU prior to starting the program. Some schools are more lenient. Some schools will say all you need is 2 to 3 years of ICU within the last 2 to 3 years, meaning you can work in the ICU for 2 years, transfer out for 2 years, apply and get into school. This is why open houses, you guys, make a big difference, because they're all a little different as far as those types of requirements. But the other unit other than those are NICU and PICU. People run into problems having that experience, and NICU is better than, PICU, the pediatric ICU is better than the neonatal ICU as far as range of schools who take it. But that's also something to keep in mind. And I work at a pediatric hospital as a CRNA. I love kids. We're getting ready to have our third kid. I would never ever want to encourage anyone not to want to pursue pediatric ICU, but just make sure if CRNA is your goal, that your career or your program that you really want to get into will take that experience. It doesn't mean that once you become a CRNA, you can't go back to the pediatric world. That's completely, obviously I've gone from adults to peds. There's the possibilities are endless once you become a CRNA, but unfortunately you have to play by the school's rules. And if they don't take NICU, PICU, then get into the adult ICU and make your pediatric career a plan in the future. I've had some people who transfer out of the NICU or PICU to an adult ICU just to go to school, which is unfortunate, because then you start your experience all over again. These schools require 2 to 3 years of high acuity ICU. And I'm also going to touch on high acuity real quick too, just because it's another mistake I see commonly made by students. They take an ICU job, but maybe it's at a really rural community. And rural can be good because you have more autonomy. You make more decisions for yourself. So don't get me wrong. But if your program does not know the types of acuity that you get, and they have not heard of that hospital, especially if you're applying out of state, they're not going to, unless your resume really shines, they're not going to know, are you seeing vents the majority of the time you're working? Are you dealing with vasoactive drips? Or are you shipping those patients to a level 1 center near you? They really want to see high acuity because they want to make sure you're managing multi-organ failure and multiple vasoactive drips and ventilators, maybe even, proning patients or CRRT or ECMO or balloon pumps. They really love all that high acuity. The sicker, the better, essentially. So when you're taking your ICU job, when you're asking these managers what types of patients they have in the unit, ask them, do you see ECMO? Do you see CRRT? Are there opportunities for leadership roles? What kind of committee work do you guys offer that I can get involved in? Being proactive and picking your unit and asking what opportunities are ahead of you as a new nurse is really the way you want to go. Some hospitals require a 2 to 3 year residency program. Typically, schools will count that experience as your ICU experience because you're not really with a preceptor usually, except for maybe the first 3 months, and then they technically consider you on the residency after that, which just means that you have this kind of period of having a mentor essentially. But they will take that experience. The only problem with residency programs, and let's just say if it's a 2 or 3 year residency program, and after a year of ICU, you're ready to go back to grad school. If you break that contract, you guys, you could be in a lot of trouble and you could be on the no hire list for that hospital. So you want to make sure you look into those things too and know what you're getting yourself into if you're committing to a work contract for 2 or 3 years. So yeah, leadership. I think, did I get off topic a little bit?
It's okay. It's all gold, Jenny. It's all gold. So I want to ask you real quick. So can you work while you're in CRNA school?
That's a great question. That's a lot of people ask me that question. And I wish I had a solid answer for you. It's yes and no. Yes, because even I worked for the first 3 months of my program. But then afterwards I decided it was not worth my stress. And, I was like, $1,000 a month is not going to make or break me in the long run. It wasn't worth my stress. So after 3 months of working, I think 1 or 2 days a week, I quit. Some students manage to work 1 or 2 days a week again for usually the first 3 or 4 months, possibly. Now that it's DNP prepared, if you do all your didactic work up front, you may be able to work 1 or 2 days a week for the first year of the program even. And then the last 2 years, I wouldn't recommend it. Just because once clinicals pick up and you're in your actual anesthesia coursework, it's very intense. You have to dedicate 50 to 60 hours a week between clinical and studying. And so it's like, do you really want to work 70, 80 hours a week, but you also have to maintain your GPA at a 3.0. So, or you get kicked out of the program. So you have to kind of decide, is money really worth it? Can I really juggle all these things? And that's going to be different for everyone. If you have kids or other obligations, probably not. If you're lucky enough to maybe live at home with your parents who can cook and clean for you, and, maybe you can still work 1 day a week. The only SRNA I ever mentored, who was a student of mine, managed to work a stat nurse job. He did nights. He did 12 hours every Saturday night. He said that the only reason it worked for him is because he either would sleep because it was slow, or he would get some studying done. Because it just wasn't a very busy shift to be on. Some nights were busy, some weren't. So he managed to work 1 day a week through the entire program. That's not very common. So again, I would say vast majority of students do not work. They take out loans. And that's just kind of the name of the game. And the ones who do occasionally work, it's intermittently, and it's maybe going to be enough to pay for your groceries every month, and that's it.
Okay, so that brings me to how I know when we talked earlier, you mentioned that there were a lot of myths out there about CRNA school. Like some of the myths or some of the things that I hear, I don't know if they're myths or if they're actually true, is it's an incredibly rigorous program. I think that's probably true. Overwhelmingly expensive, which makes it prohibitive for a lot of people, and that you basically have no life. So what are some of the myths you hear and any that you can debunk?
Yeah, I would love to debunk some myths. As far as it being ridiculously hard, that was one of the fears I had. Remember when I first heard about CRNA, I was like, well, I heard it's ridiculously hard. I'm not smart enough for that. What I want to say, there's no such thing as not being smart enough for anything in life, for that matter. That's where I am now in my life, but I wish I'd known that 10, 15 years ago. But long story short, if you're committed to something and you're willing to put 110% in, you can do whatever you put your mind to. You really, really can. But the commitment has to be there. And what I tell students is that book smart will only take you so far. You need grit. You need discipline. You need accountability. You need flexibility. You need to be adaptable. These are all resilience, key characteristics of an SRNA. You have to want to, you can't always be rewarded for what you do. You have to kind of, grit to me says you're doing something with no reward. It's hard. It's painful. It's not fun, but you're doing it anyways because you know you're going to see growth. People who you hear like these Olympic swimmers who practice for these ridiculous hours, it hurts. It's painful. It's not fun, but then they win the gold medal, so having grit and discipline can really bring you out on top. And so I think knowing how much dedication this is going to take going into it is really going to set you up for success, meaning anyone can do it. You just have to have the discipline and accountability to hold yourself accountable to do the work. These programs want you to pass. These programs would not have their doors open if their attrition rate was, or they would look bad essentially if their attrition rate was 50%. Who'd want to attend that program? So essentially, if you're accepted into the program, they really want you to be successful. Not only that, but in order to keep the doors open, they have to keep a board passing rate of 80%. So they really work with their students to try to make sure that you're going to be passing boards so you don't make their program potentially lose their accreditation. So they tell you what you need to do. It's just up to you to do it. They literally give you an outline. Do this, do that, do that. And if you do it, you're going to be fine. The key to that is it's a lot of work. It's 60 hours a week. It's a lot of work on top. So if you're working in clinical 36 hours a week, you're spending the rest of that time studying every single week. And don't get me wrong, we went to Puerto Rico for a week. We took a week vacation, went to Puerto Rico. We don't ever watch TV anymore. Now we have 2 kids and one on the way, and I'm working and doing my mentoring business. I have no time. And I look back at grad school and the time I had in grad school, I'm like, we watch Netflix every Friday night. Like that's having time. Like I'm kind of envious of those days. Like I don't even have that time now. As a working adult, juggling everything. So it's not, your life doesn't suck. You have time to have friends. You have time to go out and drink, go to the bar. You have time to take vacation. We would go out drinking after class. Not that we probably should have, but we commuted to class. And there was 5 of us. So one of us would be DD. And then after our 8-hour class, we need like a breather. And we're like, let's go get a drink. So we go to the bar with some classmates, have a beer for an hour, and then go home. So we managed to do that for the whole 2 years we were in school. So that was fun. I mean, it's not all terrible. I think people post about that a lot because yes, it's hard. And there's a lot of times where I came home, I took some Advil, drank some wine, and then cried in the shower, and then got out, did my work, and get up and did it again every day. It was like, got home, wine, Advil, cry, go back to clinical, got home, wine, Advil, cry. But then you get through it. You kind of become kind of like a robot and the motions, and before you know it, you're getting ready to graduate. So it's not all awful, but it is a lot of work, and it's very hard, and it's very taxing. And I think it's more about the burnout than anything. So coping with stress and managing your own stress level is really key as far as juggling it all, and not being so hard on yourself. Because let's just face it, ICU nurses tend to be type A. Most nurses actually in general, not just ICU nurses. But you're harder on yourself than anyone else. And I think, at least I tell my SRNAs that I work with, I say, you're your own worst critic. Just because you didn't get every A-line, every intubation, every IV, or maybe you didn't know the answer to my question, don't beat yourself up over it. You're learning, you're a student. That's the name of the game. Me as a CRNA, I still have bad days. I still don't get my intubation some days, or A-lines, or epidurals. I mean, it happens. You're human, and you do the best you can. And every day is a learning experience for growth. So that's that myth debunked. And what was the other one? The debt, was that the other one?
The cost.
The cost. Yeah, this is probably honestly the hardest one for me to talk about because this is, in my opinion, getting out of control, as is most education across the nation. Didn't mean for that to rhyme, it just did. Um, but, there are some programs, you guys, that are close to $200,000. And then there are some programs that are $40,000. Now, granted, once they become D&P programs, they're probably going to jump up to more like $60,000. But I would say the average cost for CRNA school is right around $100,000. And, I had $80,000 of student loan debt from my undergrad because when I turned 18, I took out a credit card and paid my way through college. And once I got into nursing school, because I didn't get in the first time, I didn't work a whole lot. So I took out a lot of loans just to go get my undergrad degree. So when I was faced with going back to grad school, luckily the program I got into was affordable. I think my tuition was it was less than $40,000, but then I had to take out loans to live on. So all in all, I ended up with $150,000 of student loan debt when I was done with my graduate degree. I've been out for 6 years and I have $22,000 left. And what I can tell you is I love Amazon. I'm terrible with money. I'm not perfect and I make mistakes. I don't do Dave Ramsey. I don't do anything fancy. One of the best things I did when I was done with school, we didn't have kids, which probably played into it. So we rented a house that was like $1,000 a month, which I thought was expensive at the time. I drove my 14-year-old Nissan Sentra until I was pregnant with our first, and the door handle busted off in a snowstorm. And I finally was like, I have to crawl in through my passenger door to get into my car. It's time to get a car. And I'm pregnant and this is hard. We took a few nice trips. We went to St. Lucia, Whistler, but otherwise we lived at the same standard that we lived in grad school, which was cutting back on a lot of things. And I paid off $90,000 in 2 years. I did work. I did like 16-hour shifts, 24-hour shifts, and I picked up typically 2 24-hour shifts of overtime a month, along with 8 hours overtime intermittently. I made a lot of money my first few years out of school. So I made sure I put everything into my loans that I could. And then when we had kids, it kind of went, wah, wah, wah. We got a house, we got a car, kids' daycare is so expensive. But we did the best we could. I refinanced. I should have done that sooner, but I refinanced, set up a 5-year repayment plan. It was like, set it, forget it. So that's kind of where we are with that. And I wouldn't let that fear hold you back. A lot of people have never had loans and they're terrified of it. I was never that way because I juggled loans all through my undergrad years and I have way too many credit cards because of it. But I also know the seriousness of it if you were to make a mistake. So the key is knowing your numbers, knowing your budget. If you have to, if you're still not comfortable with making your own budget or knowing your numbers, get a financial planner. And do that early, meaning as soon as you graduate nursing school, get a financial planner involved. Have them help you set aside money so you can have a nest egg ready to go when you get into grad school. We had about $10,000 in savings. That was after I paid for a $30,000 wedding. It was really hard for me to come up with that kind of money. I worked a lot of overtime as an ICU nurse to get that nest egg, and we blew through it in that time. And I remember I graduated, took my boards, and that period of graduating and taking boards and starting work was about 3 months. We were broke. I had no job. I took out a $10,000 credit card loan because, again, I told you I have lots of credit cards. I have good credit, though. So I took out a credit card loan. We lived on that $10,000 until I started my job. And then I made sure I paid that off right away. But it was like 0% for 18 months, so I had 18 months to figure out how to pay that off. So just be smart with it, but you get through. The payoff is worth it. So, we've never had to sacrifice financially to pay all my student loans. If you get upwards of a debt to income ratio of over 100%, meaning if you're making $200,000 a year and you have $200,000 or more of student loans, that is usually where I see the CRNAs I work with complain more about paying off their debt or struggling a little bit more. So just keep that in mind. But between you and your spouse, you're making $300,000 a year. You could probably handle, $270,000 of debt. Is it going to be fun? No, but you could probably handle it. But if you're between you and your spouse, you're maxing out at $200,000 a year, and you're going to have $300,000 of student loan debt. That's going to get hard. That's going to be a sacrifice for several years after school to get that paid down quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you for that. And then a moment ago, you mentioned something about DNP. Can you talk about that versus the DNAP and what that means for CRNAs?
Yeah, sure. Because this is also kind of it's confusing. And I myself had to actually reach out to a couple faculty members to explain this to me. Um, all programs are transitioning to DNP in 2022. And actually, all advanced practice nurse degrees are going this way. So you guys were not unique in this, but it's through the Council of Accreditation. It's the new requirement. So in 2022, all nurse anesthesia programs are going to be now DNP. So this is the last year to get into CRNA school as a MSN, if that's what you want. The biggest difference is it tacks on 9 months of additional schooling. And to be honest with you, I'm going back for my DNP now as already a working CRNA. It's going to take me 3 years part-time. So I wish I would have done the 9-month course, but it is what it is, but that's 9 more months of not working. So it's hard for people to swallow that. But DNP, DNAP. So here, let me get my notes out. Here's, I did write some stuff down. But the biggest, it's really not that big of a difference, to be quite honest with you, like in the big scheme of things. The doctorate of nurse anesthesia practice is the DNAP, and that typically occurs outside a school of nursing, typically. I can't say it 100% to any of this. I just know typically where a DNP occurs inside a college of nursing. And the only difference in curriculum is that a DNP maybe focuses more on nursing theory and leadership, where the DNAP is more clinically based leadership. And so that's the biggest difference, meaning their curriculum is technically the same. Maybe one of their courses might be slightly different, but for the most part, it's the same thing. The only other thing to be aware of is if you're getting your DNAP and say you want to become a program director someday, or maybe an assistant program director at a university that is a DNP university, there may be issues with you qualifying for tenure as a nurse, which is essentially teachers' job security. That's really the biggest issue, or they may not hire you at all based on their facilities requirements. So that's the only really other thing to think about, is if you really want to teach someday, the DNP will probably give you more range as far as where to go, versus if you took a DNAP, you may be limited to teach at another program that is also a DNAP. But that's really it. As far as clinicals, DNP does not change a thing. You're still required to have the same amount of clinical hours, cases, all of that. So people always ask me, well, is a DNP more prepared than an MSN? No, it's just more theory. It's a capstone project. It's a research project. The anesthesia coursework is the same. I have had some program directors tell me that now that they have more time, that they are maybe adding in additional stuff like POCUS, which is point of care ultrasound, or maybe the business of anesthesia to talk about QZ billing and TEFRA laws, and going into more coursework like that maybe they didn't have time for before. So that may be a slight advantage. Maybe you'll get a little bit extra out of your education, but it's not going to really change the nuts and bolts of what you learn as far as anesthesia goes.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about the different kinds of environments where a CRNA would work. How varied are the job prospects?
They're very varied, and also hours, very flexible. I mean, I've done every shift of 24-hour shifts, 16, 10s, 13s and 14s. I've done 8s. So that can be found based on where you look. There's level 1 trauma hospitals. There's small rural hospitals where maybe it's all CRNA only. There's different models, like I said. So there's CRNA only practices. There's supervision models, which is where maybe you have one attending for 7 CRNAs. And then there's models where you have one attending for 4 CRNAs. So that can, vary based on where you work. There's also CRNAs who work at ketamine clinics or pain clinics. There's CRNAs who work at ophthalmology. So they do like eyeballs, cataracts, that kind of thing. There's CRNAs who work at endoscopy clinics. So they do colonoscopies, EGDs all day. There's CRNAs who do legal. You could be the witness or expert witness for legal cases. You can get political. You can have a political career. I know CRNAs who own businesses. They actually run their own anesthesia practice. There's also CRNAs. I know a CRNA who's a hypnotist. So that's like his business, his side business. He focuses on wellness and hypnotism, and it's actually very fascinating. And there's just all kinds of stuff. You can be an author. I mean, you program director, so an educator. I might have left, but yeah, there's just a wide variety out there as far as you can even specialize if you just want to do pediatrics, if you just want to do OB. There are jobs that you work 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, and all you do is OB. That's all you do is you cover OB, which is labor and delivery for, so quite a range.
So lots of different things to do, not necessarily always just in an OR.
Correct.
Doing surgery.
Yes, OR is not your thing. I mean, the vast majority of jobs are in some type of operating room suite. But that comes in all different shapes and forms. I mean, I've worked at a level 1 operating room. I've worked at a surgery center. Those are very different.
Right.
And, I've never worked at a pain clinic or dental clinic, but I mean, for me, I forgot anesthetics. That's a big one now that's coming out is, I know CRNAs who run their own anesthetic business. So they do like the fillers. What is the other one? The vampire facials. So they actually do like Botox and things like that. So, yeah.
For the discount, probably.
Yeah, I could use some, actually. I'm thinking about it.
So what's the best part about your job? What do you love the most about being a CRNA?
Yeah, that's a great question. I really love taking away someone's fear and anxiety and pain, all of those things. I'm the first one, so before you get ready to go back for surgery, and it could be open heart, which could be terrifying. It could be, something as simple as a trigger finger release, and so maybe it's like, okay, but either way, your anxiety is still the same, right? You're still scared. You've never done it. You don't, what if something happens, or what if I don't wake up, or, so as a CRNA, I'm walking to the bedside in pre-op and I can answer those questions. I can be there. I can calm them. I can reassure them I'm with them the whole time. So I really think the key to having someone wake up comfortably is alleviating the anxiety going in. And then also you're there, you're communicating with them the whole time, even though they're not physically talking to you. You're watching their heartbeat, you're watching their vital signs. You can tell if they're in pain, even though they're asleep. So, or you can tell if they need more volume, or if the surgeons are maybe compressing the vena cava. You can tell all these things based on what operation you're doing. I think it's the challenge of managing someone through what could be a critical operation, checking their electrolytes, replacing blood products, again, knowing what the surgeons are doing when they unclamp, if they're doing like aorta, if they're once they unclamp, you get a lot of lactic acid release, which can cause a lot of hemodynamic shifts, acidosis, and it's all acute. So you're managing that, replacing electrolytes in labs to kind of compensate for the acidotic shift. It's just fascinating. So if you like pharmacology, pathophysiology, CRNA, you would really enjoy. And then just, again, if someone wakes up from surgery and they're like, am I all done? That's one of the best things I can hear, because if they wake up and they're not even in pain to know they had surgery and they're shocked that they're already done, even though it was 4 hours of surgery, you're like, sweet, I did my job really good. They don't even know they had surgery. So that's always enjoyable too.
That is awesome. Yeah. I worked medical ICU for 8 or 9 years. And then I always say I semi-retired to the recovery room. And I love it when patients wake up and they're always like, really? I'm done?
Yeah.
And they're so happy.
Singing a song to you as you're pushing them to pack you. You're like, this is awesome.
They're so relieved. They're so happy. And it is great. And I definitely do see the difference between good pain management intraoperatively and not. And it really does make a huge difference. So thank you for being such an advocate for your patients in that way. Yeah. That is great. Okay. I want to hear more about your mentorship program. And I bet our listeners do too, the ones that are thinking about CRNA school. So how do you help students through this journey?
Yeah, no, that's great. So a couple years ago now, I can't believe it's been almost 2 years. Again, as I was kind of transitioning jobs and moving, different cities. I had a handful of students, and I mean like 10, and some of them were people I actually physically knew, ICU nurses that came up to me in the ICU when I drop off my open heart patients and asked me. And so I was just helping them. And what I found was I started to reach out to program directors for them. I started talking to, because I worked with an assistant director, and closely with the assistant director. So I chatted with him, talked to current SRNAs, and I kind of came to the realization that applying to CRNA school is not black and white. And just because I had a certain experience at the certain schools I apply to does not mean that my experience will be what their experience is like, because everyone is unique. Everyone's unique. Everyone has a different background. It's so multifaceted that it was impossible to give someone cookie cutter advice. You can't do it. But I think because of that, it piqued my interest. I was like, ooh, this is kind of fun. I kind of like cracking the code and trying to help them. And, also I felt for them too, because I remember how stressful it was for me. And back in 2009, when I was going through it all, there wasn't that many resources out there. There wasn't Instagram. There wasn't Facebook. My biggest help on my pathway was meeting or knowing an CRNA who was already in the program ahead of me. And she happened to be my friend, and she helped me. And that to me that changed the game for me. That really, really helped me. And so I know the power of mentorship. And I was that student who struggled. Like I said, I didn't get into nursing school. I struggled academically for a long time until I could figure things out for myself. But I needed mentors. I needed help. I was not the kind of person who had it all figured out. And so I knew that I now had this role as a CRNA that I could be that mentor for these students. And so I started a Facebook group. And so because I found myself giving very similar advice over and over again. So I started a group so I could record myself and have my 10 people watch it, and then I don't have to make 10 different phone calls. And that group just grew. Now we have a large community of over 10,000 aspiring students. And about a year ago, I started CRNA School Prep Academy because I was doing all my teaching on Facebook. And it was very time consuming, and I was still working full time. And I said, I really want to take this to a different level, but I need to figure out how I can sustain this and not work 60 hours a week. I have 2 little kids with one on the way now. So I started a mentoring community that is a paid mentor community, but it allows me to give my time to you, to my students. We do monthly workshops. Like I'm getting ready to do a clotting cascade workshop this Friday. I'm not going to lie. I'm a little wish me luck on that one. So we educate our students. I have a program faculty member, Richard Wilson, who works with me now. He helps me make content for my students. We're working on an SRNA boot camp for the SRNAs who are getting ready to enter their programs so they can get a head start on chemistry and physics and all that fun stuff. So I've had fun with it. We do monthly Q&As. I reach out to program directors. I'm getting programs involved. We're now doing our first in-person conference this year in South Carolina. So it's just been a whirlwind of a year, but it's been so great. I've helped hundreds of students at this point gain acceptance. We're up to like 600 some students in our membership. I've gotten great feedback from it. It's just been awesome. And it's been so rewarding. I think what I enjoy the most is the relationships I get to develop with my students. And once they get acceptance, I don't just disappear. I'm here. They can hit me up for questions. Hey, Jenny, I have this case tomorrow. What should I plan for? Or what's the best book for this? Or it's just fun getting to help my students in a way that I know I would have appreciated back when I needed it.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And so it's called CRNA Academy?
Yeah. So actually, when I was looking for domains, I wish it could be something as simple as like CRNA Prep Academy, because that's what most people call it, but the domain's taken. So it actually is now CRNA School Prep Academy.
Got it. Okay.
So,
and what is the name of your Facebook group so that people can go find you?
Yeah, sure. That's a little different because that one's actually called ICU. So like ICU nurses, with the letters I and then C and U, dreaming about anesthesia, and by CRNA School Prep Academy. I think I put that on there just to clarify because people were getting confused if they were the same group or the same thing. So ICU Dream About Anesthesia is the Facebook community, 100% free. We're on there. We do probably quarterly lives on there, me and Richard. And so you're not high and dry in that community. I monitor everything. So the feedback on there is amazing. It's a great resource, especially if you're early on, you're not sure. I tell my students, when you're 100% sure CRNA is for you, that's when CRNA School Prep Academy is really for you. We have designed it to go from the planning phase all the way through the SRNA phase. So I have it like road mapped out. So don't wait till you're applying to your school to seek out resources for CRNA School Prep Academy because there's so much in there. You're going to be overwhelmed. I tell people to study for the interview, you're talking 6 to 9 months to prepare for the interview because the interview itself is very grueling. We do mock interviews. We do essay edits, resume edits, transcript reviews. We're going to open up opportunities for tutoring, like for SRNAs. So there's just tons of resources. So yeah, I think the Facebook group is kind of a nice way for people to kind of figure things out. Ask your questions, see if this is the right path for you. And CRNA School Prep Academy is for those who are 100% committed to CRNA.
Okay, that sounds absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. This was so eye-opening for me, and I learned a ton, and I hope that everybody listening did as well. I just want to pop back in real quick and thank Jenny for taking the time out of her very busy schedule to come onto the podcast and share her experience and all of her expertise with you guys. So Jenny does have a really active and very, very informative Facebook group. So if you want to get a little bit of insight about the process of learning about CRNA school, go check out her Facebook group. It's called ICU Dreaming About Anesthesia. So go and check that out. And then I will put a link to her CRNA School Prep Academy in the show notes. So that's where you want to go if you're ready to dive in and start applying. So again, thanks so much, Jenny, and I'll see you guys again soon. Bye for now. This podcast is brought to you by Straight A Nursing.